Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Can we have a creepy experiences as children thread? I was a pretty scary kid, mostly because I did a lot of sleepwalking. My dad would wake up to me standing at the foot of his bed, just staring at him blankly. Other times I would stop halfway up the stairway that leads to my parents' room, sit down, and sob quietly. Obviously, I have no recollection of doing these things. They are stories told to me by my parents, years later. The really scary thing is that, as a child, my mom would do the exact same thing to my grandparents. Her siblings didn't sleepwalk, neither do mine.
Clearly remember having a little sister when I was younger, maybe when I was 3 or 4 years old. I remember the thrill of a new little person coming to live in our home. My parents still staunchly deny the existence of any little sister, and claim I was only child. They usually laugh off my question, but lately they've become more and more adamant on the subject, sometimes bordering on anger. I don't really know what to make of it. I might just be paranoid. I've found pictures under my mother's bed of me holding a baby, but the faces were scratched off, including mine. I found those pictures when I was 7 or 8 and playing cops and robbers with my friends in the house, and I decided to hide under the bed. That's what first triggered my memory. I knew it was me in the picture, even though the face was scratched, and somehow I knew it was my little sister, too, and it all made so much sense, so much so that I nonchalantly brought it up, asking where my little sister went during dinner that night. I remember my parents doing what they normally did whenever I spoke at the dinner table: just ignore me. I think it was some Dr. Spock bullshit parenting thing, like, discipline through humility, because I was supposed to know a child shouldn't speak until spoke to. Well, okay, the whole humility thing usually worked, because my parents wouldn't say a word to each other, cleaned up the dinner table, and then got me ready for bed. For some reason, I felt a deep-seated embarrassment for even bringing it up. A few weeks later, however, on the way home from school, we had a carpool, and a little girl in my class named Sarah was sitting in the back with me while my mom drove the minivan. I normally didn't talk with Sarah in school, because she was a snotty girl and I was just a normal little boy, a noise surrounded in dirt. I remember Sarah going on about her new baby brother, and it just irritated me to the point of, well, my baby sister is 10 times prettier than your little brother. My mom said not to tell stories, that I don't have a little sister. Naturally, I retorted with, I did, but not now. I figured this was normal, to have a sibling that disappears. The memories were so fresh. There was no other reality, there was nothing strange about it, there was nothing wrong with what I was saying. My mother was silent, and I described what my baby sister to Sarah, who, for whatever reason, listened to and believed every word I said. When my mom got home, I was still absent-mindedly talking about my sister. At this point, it was just mindless chatter from a little boy who was making up stories from a platform of truth, or what I assumed was truth. After the door closed, and I continued to talk, it was at that moment I realized that I wasn't just chattering, but I was being ignored. My mother went up to the guest bedroom, which my dad was using for an office at the time, locked the door and left me to my own devices without so much of a word or acknowledgement. It sounds strange, but it was shocking. Nothing like that had happened before. Any deviation from the routine was monumental, especially because my mom was so light-hearted and interested in me when my dad wasn't around. I hung around the house for about 4 hours before my dad came home. My mom must have called him, because he didn't look surprised when I saw all my crayons and shit strewn all over the living room floor and my mom locked the office. He just made me dinner, we ate in silence, and put me to bed. After that day, some social tact was formed in my head and I decided not to bring it up for a few years. As I got older, it dawned on me how strange the whole thing was. Other than what I assumed was just a fevered imagination, everything was fine. My parents loved me a lot, and I never had any problems with them out of the ordinary. I often wondered if my little sister was murdered, or if something happened, maybe adopted. Sometimes I would bring up my vivid imagination about how made up a little sister to gauge my parents' reaction. Like I said, they would laugh it off too, attributing it to my vivid imagination, but tonight, I crossed a line I wish I hadn't. I'm still living at home, so I get the parental bullshit. I'm not underage, going to college, can't afford to live in dorms, etc. bullshit excuses. Anyway, I wanted to take my dad's other work car out tonight to see some friends. My mom wouldn't let me. I think this has been a stressful week for both of us, and suddenly the whole thing turned into a shouting match. Her calling me lazy, stupid druggie, couldn't even get into a good college, going to community college to get my grades up. Well, this all stung coming from my mother, so, in what I can only guess was true love, I shot back at her with, well, at least I didn't kill my baby sister and hide it from my son for the last 2 decades. My mother, immediately, covered her ears, closed her eyes and began screaming in this shrill, hoarse, guttural sound. At first, I was like, whoa, what the fuck? But after about 30 seconds of just non-stop screaming, I tried to hug her, I wrapped my arms around her, and she kept screaming, taking in big gasps of air and screaming more, her hands over her ears and her eyes closed tight. I kept whispering, shish, shish, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. At one point, between gasps, she opened her eyes and looked up at me, and I felt no recognition there. She immediately closed her eyes again and started screaming like I was the one causing the screams. I let go of her, and she ran screaming back into my dad's office. For the next 2 hours I heard screaming, accompanied with a rhythmic and heart-wrenching thud on the outer wall of the office. I heard pictures fall off the wall and shit getting knocked over intermittently, but the thuds were pretty faithful. But, like I said, this went on for 2 hours. It's been 6 hours since this happened. The thuds stopped, and I was really nervous. I spent some time outside the door during those 2 hours pleading with my mom to stop whatever was going on. She just kept screaming and, what I can only assume, throwing herself against the wall. I briefly thought about calling the cops or something. It felt really overwhelming, but then it suddenly stopped. Now, I don't want to sound like a pussy or anything, but I was crying, and after the screaming and thuds stopped, my first words choked out were, "Mommy?" I heard this horrible snap. Fuck, I can't even explain it. It sounded like when you break a dead sapling or something. It was so deliberate. She's not dead, but I can't get into the office without breaking down the door, and my dad would be pissed. This sounds insane, I know, but you all have parents, right? What if she was just trying to get away from me and then I have to explain to my dad why I broke her door? I walked outside. I was able to see through the second-story window. The lights in the office are off, but, from the streetlight, I can make out my mom's silhouette. She's just standing there, her face in the corner. This all happened about 6 hours ago. My dad is away on business until Sunday morning.
If she isn't out in a few hours, responsive, leave a note and stay at a friend's. And/or call the cops on the part of worrying.
I can hear her calling me now. I'm going to see if she's all right.
I had an experience that I remember from when I was around 2 to 4 years old. I know I was that young because it was before the 3 of us girls got our own rooms and our grandfather still lived with us. My sisters were teenagers by this time, and I slept with them. When they would go spend the night with friends, my mother insisted I slept in her and my dad's room. This room would later belong to my middle sister. I would get the attached gun closet for my room. I have no idea what in the world woke me up, but at about 3 in the morning I woke up. The bedroom was dark except for the digital readout of my mom's clock on her bedstand and quiet except for my mom's snoring. I sat up just a little and looked around the dark room. Here's the weird part. The door was open. I could just make out the doorway and the short hall leading directly into the empty room I shared with my sisters. About 1.5 inches above the floor, staying perfectly stationary, was a small bright blue light. It hovered there moving for a few minutes, and I thought it was a reflection from Mom's digital clock because of the color of the readout on the clock. I found this to be wrong as it began to move across the room very slowly, at a pace that an animal wouldn't move. It took this small bright blue light. It wasn't reflecting anything, nor was it casting a light on anything near it, to move from the middle of the doorway across the room about an hour. It disappeared less than a foot away from the VCR, in the doorway of what would later become my own bedroom, my dad's gun closet. As I said, Mom tried to tell them it was a mouse. She had woken up in the middle of it moving, and I said, "Mommy, do you see that light?" "What light?" "That blue light's that moving. It's just a mouse. Go back to sleep." She then promptly fell asleep. The next morning, my oldest sister, 17 to 19 years old at the time, had the bright idea to tell her 2 to 4-year-old sister that the light she saw was a ghost. Dad and Grandpa both said it was just a dream. My husband, on the other hand, says it sounds like a wisp. The light didn't weave back and forth, nor did it bob up and down. It didn't stop moving once it started, and it moved very slowly, taking about an hour or a little longer to cover an area of 8 to 10 feet. This doesn't sound like a mouse, rat, or even a sewer rat like we sometimes had coming into that house.
When I was about 4, I was sitting alone in the living room playing with marbles. One of them rolled under the couch, and I stuck my hand as far under as I could to find it. I couldn't find it, so I withdrew my hand, and a black, withered, feminine hand reached out from under the couch after me. I remember it clearly. I sat there, too young to really know how batshit insane this was, but I remember thinking to myself, this is not right. I sat there dumbfounded and watched it. It groped around, then withdrew. Then it emerged again, pushing some plastic wrappers at me, as if it was trying to give them to me. When I didn't take them, it withdrew again, taking the trash with it, and was gone. I got up very calmly and walked to my mother in the kitchen, at the other side of the house, and told her, "Mommy, a hand just reached out from under the couch." She got an odd look on her face, of course, but I was a very quiet, obedient kid who did not tell stories. She told me that was impossible and walked back to the living room with me, and even reached her hands under the couch to show me there was nothing there. Later, my dad came home and lifted the couch, and all that was under there was my marbles, and some random trash. For years, I discounted this as just a vivid dream I had had when I was a child. Obviously, I didn't believe it really happened. But years later, when I was like 18, I mentioned it to my mother in recollection. She surprised me by saying that, no, it actually happened. She remembered me coming to her that afternoon and telling her about the hand under the couch. She said it had disturbed her greatly, and was the reason they had thrown the couch out soon after, because she had bought the couch second-hand, and the seller told her that an elderly black lady had died on it.
Alright, X. Here's a completely true story for you. About a month or 2 ago, I bought a Mossberg 500 for home defense, after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood and punk-ass kids being dicks and bothering locals. I already owned a SIG, but nothing quite scares off little punk-ass roadies like a big black shotgun. My sister has been browsing X for a couple years now. Longer than me, in fact, and the one thing that stuck with her despite all her desensitization to being scared is that she is absolutely hateful of mirrors. She refuses to have one in her room, and the one in our bathroom, our rooms are Jack and Jill, which means 2 rooms with a joint bathroom between them, makes her leery. But in all the years I've known her, and we've had our rooms conjoined, I had no way to see what was gonna happen that one night. She had a habit of getting up in the middle of the night to pee, like clockwork at about the same time every night. It used to wake me up due to the light in the middle of the night from under the door. But as she got older, she stopped using the light to stop waking me up. Until that night a month ago. She had gotten up, like any other night, and went to the bathroom. But then, at about 1:30, I heard a shriek like something out of hell itself. Frantically, she threw open the door to my room and ran in, this 16-year-old girl tripping and running like I had never seen her before. I was bleary and too slow to react. She threw open my closet and grabbed the shotgun before running into the bathroom. 3 deafening cracks of thunder followed. When the police came, they couldn't get her to say what she saw that night. But whatever it was, she blew 3 holes in the bathroom wall, shattering the mirror. We had the wall patched, but she refuses to let anyone install a mirror in there ever again. We still can't get her to tell us why.
When I was about 15 during a baking hot summer, I woke up one night and couldn't move. I felt completely paralyzed. My hands were being held a few feet above me by what felt like fingers that were several inches long. The figure that held my hands was around 8 or 9 feet tall. It was completely shrouded, and I couldn't make it out clearly. I could only see the long gray fingers. I didn't feel threatened by it. As I woke up, I felt the weight returning to my arms and hands and began to slip away. The thing gently held them tighter, though it wasn't aware I was awake. I felt like it was taking something out of me, but like I said, I didn't feel like it was an evil presence. Anyway, I still couldn't move, but I could hear the noise and feel the cold air of the electric fan on my face. Complete heat wave. That's what makes it so vivid to this day. I tried to pull my hands away and it immediately let go like it was scared and retreated into the dark of my room. I fell straight into a deep sleep, and despite the general pallidness of whatever I thought was there, I was petrified the next morning on remembering this.
When I was a kid, I was paranoid as fuck. Not a really creepy story, but I would spend the whole week dreading Tuesday evenings. My room had 3 doors, used to be my grandparents' living room, 1 door into an old kitchen we didn't use, 1 into my parents' room, and 1 into the hallway under the stairs, but I'd get seriously scared of the kitchen. I used to imagine something slowly open the door, as most people do when they're scared. So, I was always too afraid to look at the door when I was going to bed. Anyway, what was so scary about Tuesday evenings is that the X-Files was on. The theme really scared me. I was about 8 at the time. I'd deliberately stay awake till after the show. I didn't like the idea of something creepy happening while I was sleepy. One time though, a few minutes after the show started, the light suddenly turned on in the kitchen along with sounds of the fridge opening and closing. The fridge didn't work, so I have no idea why anyone would do that. Honestly, I think I was just sleeping, but I got my sleeping bag and slept in the living room until my parents went to bed for over a month. Our house back then was pretty old, built by my great-grandfather or something. I miss it a lot now, but back then I was afraid of going into most rooms when I was home alone. One time I had to go into my father's study to get something. I hated going in there. There was nothing in there other than his piano, old books, and the inbuilt shelf which he had put a curtain over. I always felt like there was someone behind the curtain. This was a popular hiding place at birthday parties. Also, the door closed by itself. Well, anyway, the power went out and the room went pitch black. I've never been so afraid in my life. My mom came into the room, me screaming my head off on the ground, lost all power in my legs. Also, the ground floor bathroom looked like something out of Silent Hill.
Last summer I got into a really fucked up sleep schedule, like staying up for 3 days then sleeping for 5 hours and then continuing. One day my mom woke me up when I was sleeping, and when I woke up I started yelling and screaming some weird language. Then I started yelling, "She's dead, she's dead." This happened a few times and I don't remember it. I also get really pissed whenever someone wakes me up or walks into my room while I'm sleeping. But I have no memory of any of this. Whenever I'm feverishly sick, like when your body feels cold but you're actually hot, I sleep a lot. When I have the flu, my mother usually comes down into my room and covers me with a huge infrared comforter, and the casing on it has one of the little slits where you put in the blanket. During this time I had a nightmare that I fell into a lake while playing some sort of ball game, and was drowning while being pelted with these balls. After the dream sort of blacked out, I woke up inside of the comforter, and I could barely breathe. I was sweating furiously when my mom came in to see that I was swarming around in the blanket. When she got me out I was sobbing, pointing and yelling at the blanket for trying to hurt me. I'm now scared to sleep whenever I'm sick, and I've never slept with that blanket ever again.
Okay, I'll give this a shot. This is a creepy-ass dream I had as a kid. At least, I hope it was a dream. As a kid, my family lived in a rural area about 12 miles from the nearest town. In this dream, I wake up in the middle of the night for some reason. I hear some odd noises coming from outside my window. I go to look, and I see 3 aliens, typical greys, with their backs to me over what appears to me an animal corpse of some kind. I think it might have been a cow, since my father had some livestock on the property occasionally. It looked like they were eating it. Then I get a bright idea to yell at them to scare them off. I throw open the window and tried to yell at them, but all I managed was an unintelligible groan. All 3 heads whip around and glare at me with murderous intent. That is when I woke up. I think it was my groan that woke me up, because I have woken myself up that way a few times before. That dream still creeps me the fuck out when I think about it, even though it was 10 or so years ago. I also recall another dream where I woke up in the middle of the night because my windows were suddenly flooded with light. I look out the window and see a large disc-shaped craft hovering low and spinning rapidly. Then I wake up. I'm glad to live in a town now. No more nightmares of aliens.
I have 2. The first one is when I was sick or had a fever. In the middle of the night I used to have these strange hallucinations. It would feel like numbers are counting down or something, and as they went I got extremely worried, like if it hit 0 I would die. Whenever the numbers in my head hit 0 it would restart and go faster and faster. I'd jump out of bed, turn on the lights, go back to bed, jump back out, pace around my room, turn off the lights, get out of my room, and finally I'd go into my parents' room where my mom would come and make me take some cough medicine, etc. I'd go back to bed just fine. Second, I remember when I was younger and I first saw the movie Ju-on at a movie rental place. I started to get really creeped out by the Grudge Kid. Sometimes during the night, I swear to fucking God, someone would be turning the handle on my doorknob, but they wouldn't open the door, like if it were locked. I'd suddenly man up and open the door to find no one there. This sometimes happened 2 or 3 times a night.
This one is something my friend told me a few months ago. She lived in Dhaka, Bangladesh for a few years. They openly believe in ghosts there. As soon as it gets dark, they all turn on lights if they have them to keep the spirits out. Well, she lived in an apartment building, and she was basically in charge of raising her nephew. She swears up and down that the place was haunted. First of all, when she would walk her nephew up the stairs to their apartment, it was on the 4th floor, he would get tired and she would carry him most of the way. She says that as they got closer and closer to the apartment, he would squeeze his eyes shut tighter and tighter and hold onto her really tight and try and bury his face in her neck, as if he was so terrified of the apartment itself that he was trying hide in her. Second, she would wake up frequently in the middle of the night, unable to move, with one of 2 things happening. Sometimes, she would feel the presence, weight, warmth, breath, of two men laying on either side of her. They would be having a loud argument, screaming at each other over her. She says they were speaking Arabic but with accents she couldn't understand. Other times, she would see a silhouette of a man standing in her doorway, and hear a sort of pulsing energy noise until she passed out again. All of this stopped because her mother had a man come and read the entire Quran backwards in their house.
When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend I used to play with at the doll shop my great-grandmother owned. He was an old man, and he always smelled like tobacco. He would come and play with me for a while, and then he would go off and talk to the adults. For years I thought he was real, until one time I saw him trying to ask my mom a question and she was ignoring him. I told her that he wanted her attention, and she just replied with, "Who are you talking about?" Sometime after that, my granny sold the shop and the old man stopped visiting me. One day my grandmother and I were looking through an old photo album, and I found a bunch of pages full of people that looked exactly like the old man that would come play with me, right down to clothes he was wearing. I asked my grandmother who the man was, and she explained that he was my great-grandfather, and also made an offhand comment about how he smoked like a chimney.
Boring story, but creepy nonetheless. Back when I was around 7 or 8 years old, my mother was dating this one guy. He had a son who was the same age as me, and he was odd. I remember him coloring in the eyes of my Barbie dolls with black marker or my mom's eyeliner. I don't remember. Anywho, the last memory I've ever really had of him was this one specific night. I was sleeping in my bedroom and he kept waking me up, so I went and told my mom. This happened in the middle of the night, 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. most likely. So my mom locked him in my room. The lock was set up so that you could lock it from the outside, and I slept in the spare room. I drifted off to sleep for a while, and then I suddenly heard a weird whispering sound and I opened my eyes to see the kid staring at me, whispering nonsense. I screamed and my mom came in, turning on the light, and he sort of snapped out of whatever trance he was in and ran off back to my bedroom. I wonder what he's like today. I'm 16 now.
My older brother was really into field recordings, noise and just sound in general. I was about 10 or 11 at the time. He was 17/18, and our bedrooms were right next to each other. So a lot of the time when I was in my bedroom I could hear weird, cool sounds, beats from the other side of the wall. Because I had, and still do, have tinnitus, I actually really enjoyed hearing those sounds when I would try and fall asleep. They sort of masked the annoying tinnitus sound. So basically, every night, I'd fall asleep to mutated sounds of wind, rain, white noise with reverb swirling around. He recorded straight to digital audio tape. Most of the time he would be with his microphones when making his field recordings. However, when he was in secluded areas he would occasionally leave a microphone there while he left and did other things. He didn't do it often, but it did happen occasionally. Anyway, one night as I was lying in bed listening to the sounds from his room, they ended suddenly. This was weird because either he would start and finish the recordings, or not start them at all. The sounds hadn't been going on for very long, so I doubt he had finished. I got up out of bed, left my bedroom and into the corridor, and stood by his door. I opened it and walked in. Immediately I saw the tape he had been recording to, smashed into pieces on his floor. I was so used to see him sitting by his desk that for a moment I thought he had disappeared into thin air, because he wasn't there. I looked over to the corner of the room and he was sat there cross-legged. He was shivering quite violently, and his teeth were chattering. But it wasn't cold at all. He didn't look at me as I approached him. As I got closer, I could see that his knuckles were bloodied. I talked to him, but I can't remember what I said. Probably the obvious stuff. Are you okay? What happened? I do remember that he didn't reply to me, though. I touched him just to see if for some reason he was cold, but he felt completely normal. I put a blanket from his bed over him and went back to bed. This all happened about 6 or 7 years ago. The first time I asked him about it, he looked shocked that I knew anything about it, as if I had never come into the room. The next times I've asked him what happened that night, he says that it was nothing, that he doesn't want to talk about it, and that I should just forget it. Probably not very creepy, but it's something that has stuck with me since I was that age. Whenever I have seen or spoken to him, interacted with him in any way, that night is always in my head.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.